Crystal Quade, Democratic candidate for governor. Thank you so much for joining me here at KRCG 13. I guess just to get things started, can you give us a little bit more background information on yourself and your time in politics so far?
Yeah, well, thank you so much for having me. So I grew up in rural Southwest Missouri, down in Webster County, and I come from a regular working class background. You know, my mom was a waitress my whole life, and my father drove almost an hour to get to the factory every day, and the very first in my family to graduate from high school. I moved to Springfield to go to Missouri State University to become a social worker, and I have been serving in the state legislature for the last 8 years, representing Springfield in the Missouri House, and for 6 of those, I have been the Democratic floor leader.
Awesome. And if elected governor, what are just kind of some key policies, some key issues that your office would look to tackle?
You know, the first thing that I want to say is the state of Missouri right now is failing in so many things. And we were just chatting a second ago about the fact that Missouri has not been paying its child care providers on time. You know, folks know when they call the state of Missouri to get into Medicaid, for instance, they're on hold for 5-6 hours at a time. And there are so many places where we are not doing the basic minimums that we're promising citizens. And so as governor, you know, that's step one, is making sure that we are doing what we're saying we're going to be doing for folks. But it goes so much further than that. You know, we are the lowest paid teachers and funded education in the entire country. We've lost 18 rural hospitals in the last decade. You know, there are so many places where we rank at the very bottom in the country, and so we need to be making sure that we're doing investments that really impact everyday working class Missourians and their lives. And then, of course, you know, a big topic on everyone's mind this year is abortion access and Amendment 3. You know, Missouri right now has the most strict abortion ban in the entire country, without exceptions for rape and incest. And I've been traveling the whole state of Missouri. As mentioned, I grew up in the rural Southwest part. And what I'm hearing from everybody, regardless of where they stand on this specific issue, is that they are tired of this government overreach that we're seeing in our lives. Whether it's in the doctor's offices or coming after what books kids can read, people just want government out of their business. And I think that's the biggest difference between myself and my opponent, is I am in support of Amendment 3 and getting politicians out of our doctor's offices.
Well, obviously, as governor, you would play a big role in the state's budget. What would be kind of your plan for spending?
Yeah, I like to say that I look at the state budget as a moral document, and we should be paying attention to how we're spending our money, and as I mentioned, making investments in things that impact everyday Missourians and not the wealthiest or the corporations or the folks who write the biggest campaign checks. And so, as mentioned, you know, education is a huge passion for me, and a place where the state of Missouri really has been failing. As the first in my family to graduate high school, I understand how deeply important public education is, and there are so many parts in our state where the school is the only employer for some of our small communities, and we have not been investing the funds that we need to be doing. Of course, access to health care, making sure that it's affordable, and not just when you go to the doctor's offices, but the prescriptions that are following that. And infrastructure is a huge piece of health care as well, and something that we have, again, been failing at, our rural roads and bridges, but also broadband internet access. You know, there are places in the state of Missouri where they don't have access to broadband, and so when we're talking about access to health care, telehealth services in some of those places where we've lost those rural hospitals is a huge deal for a lot of Missourians that we just have not been meeting, that needs to be done. There's a lot more to it. Of course, the state budget is a huge document, but those are some of the highlights of the things that I want to invest in.
And just kind of sticking with spending, what would taxes look like under a Quade administration? Yeah,
so, you know, what's been really frustrating in my time in Jefferson City in the last 8 years is that we have heard every year that it's been the biggest tax cut in Missouri's history. We had a lot of folks run their primary elections on that this year back in August. And the reality is yes, there have been a lot of tax cuts. But again, they've been for the corporations and the wealthiest in our state. And we have not had a conversation around a real fair tax structure in Missouri in decades. And so not only do I want to look at how we are paying, you know, who's paying what taxes and making sure that it's fair for working class folks, but I want to have conversations around the taxes that deeply impact people every day. Grocery taxes is a great example that everyone goes to the grocery store. I know I'm a mother, I grocery shop for my family, and I have seen the increase in costs, and that's a thing that we could be addressing. I also want to look at tax credits, again, for things that are impacting day-to-day lives of Missourians. Elder care is a huge thing that I'm hearing about from everybody, and access to child care that's affordable. And so we could be looking at tax credits in those spaces instead of, again, tax credits for these big corporations that we've been doing in the state of Missouri.
And another issue that might be top of mind for some voters is public safety. What kind of key steps would your administration look to take just to make sure that Missourians feel safe?
Yeah, first and foremost is the shortage that we have for law enforcement officers across the whole state. You know, St. Louis City alone right now is short 300 law enforcement officers. We have seen in the news lately some of our small communities actually losing their entire forces because nobody will go work. And so pay and benefits is a huge piece of this discussion. We've got to be able to have the individuals there to keep us safe. But then it goes beyond that. You know, it's investment beyond the salaries, but making sure that our law enforcement have the tools that they need to be successful. You know, we hear all the time that the laws that we have in the state of Missouri right now that are so standardized don't affect the safety of folks in their small communities or individual communities. You know, what's best for St. Louis City is not what's best for Webster County, where I grew up. And I think for the state of Missouri for too long has been trying to do a blanket approach to public safety.
Well, reproductive rights may prove to be another big ticket issue come this November. Where does your administration stand on that topic?
Yeah, I absolutely believe that we should get politicians out of our personal decisions, like in our doctor's offices. I was in the legislature when the Republicans passed the bill in 2019, which put Missouri to be the first state in the entire country to ban abortions without exceptions for rape and incest when Roe was overturned. And what we've seen since then is real life and death situations for women who are going to the doctor's offices. I've personally talked to women who went in to see a doctor during an active miscarriage and are told you're not close enough to death yet, you've got to go home. And we're hearing that. We had over 800 doctors sign a letter just a couple weeks ago saying that the current laws in the state of Missouri do not allow them to do their jobs because they will go to prison if they do. And this is not the Missouri that I know and love. Missouri is a place that everyone should feel safe, and we should be able to grow and plan our families how we want. And what we're seeing right now is a really, really sad state of affairs. And I support Amendment 3. And under a Quade administration, we will listen to the will of voters. You know, we're already hearing some state senators come out and say the first thing that they're going to do is work to overturn the will of voters if Amendment 3 passes. My own opponent said that he would sacrifice his entire campaign to make sure Amendment 3 fails. And I am a governor who will listen to the will of voters and make sure that doctors are allowed to do their jobs in their state.
Well, you hear many candidates talk about what they're going to do on day one if they get elected, but as you well know, it's a little bit more complicated. It takes a little bit more collaboration than that. So what will you do to kind of make sure that you're working on both sides of the aisle to accomplish any goals you have?
Yeah, you know, that's one of the things that I've really pride myself in, the work that I've done in Jefferson City over the last 8 years. As a Democrat in a super minority party, the first thing that you learn is that to get anything done, you've got to be okay with not getting the credit, and you've got to work with folks across the aisle. And in fact, I won my very first race in 2016 by having my yard signs next to Donald Trump yard signs in the same yard, because I really do believe that we agree on more than we disagree on. And you know, the national politics and the things that are happening are real, and folks are very frustrated and very divided, but there is so much here at home that we can do together that I know folks support. Things like public education, access to health care, protecting our foster kids. You know, the list goes on and on of places where I have been able to work across the aisle, pass legislation, and so my administration will be exactly the same. You know, when I'm governor, Republicans are still going to be in charge in the Missouri House and the Senate, and I know that. And so it's going to be really about finding those places where we can move Missouri forward together. Of course, I will stand my ground on issues that are deeply important to me, as we just discussed Amendment 3, but there is so much that we can do together. And so to answer your question, you know, on day one, my job will be to get in there and look at the things under the governor's administration that have been failing. What can we do in the very beginning to make sure that we have the right people in positions, you know, folks who actually are leading our agencies, who have experience in those backgrounds, not just my friends or the campaign contributors that we unfortunately see too often. And that's going to be the first thing that I do when I get there.
Another issue that's kind of being brought up around the country is immigration. How do you see this playing a role in Missouri, if at all, and where does your office, where would it stand on that?
Yeah, it definitely is a conversation here in Missouri. And when I talk to folks, you know, it's an array of opinions and thoughts and feelings that we're getting from folks. People are definitely nervous about public safety again, and we hear a lot of rhetoric around this. A lot of folks talk about the potential of drugs coming in and out of the country and how that impacts our families. You know, my family has lost someone to an opioid overdose, and so I deeply understand the fears that come along with this. But what's really important, again, is making sure that that we're keeping our communities safe. You know, as I mentioned, we are understaffed with our law enforcement, our Missouri Highway Patrol, and I'm a governor who's going to keep our folks here and protect Missouri and make sure that we're funding them appropriately. For the role of governor, it's really about partnering with our federal delegation. There's a bipartisan immigration bill that was actually drafted by Republicans that's been sitting in Washington for far too long. And so as governor, you know, I would view my role as working with them and leaning on them to move the national legislation forward that can impact the safety of our state and country.
Kind of circling back to education, and I know you've touched on it here a number of times already. It clearly seems to be a very important issue for you. What would you do to kind of keep making sure that Missouri's education system is continuing to progress and provide quality education?
Yeah, it needs to be a huge priority for everyone in Jefferson City. You know, Missouri used to be the place in the country where folks look to us to be the leaders in education. We have the very first public kindergarten in the whole country here. And now, as mentioned, we rank at the very bottom, 49th and 50th for teacher pay and funding for our education system. And that's not the state that I want, and those are not the numbers that I know Missourians want to see. And so the first place is making sure that we're investing public taxpayer dollars into our public education system. We have seen a push in Missouri over the past few years to take public money and direct it to private and religious institutions, and we saw that the last legislative session. That is not a thing I support. I want our taxpayers' dollars to go to public education. The reality is there are so many places in the state of Missouri where there are not other schools to choose from. There's not that private school down the street. And so when we talk about providing parents choices, the reality is we need to be supporting our parents in our local communities so that those school districts, the only ones available to them, are meeting the needs of their kids. And it's not just about money and making sure that our teachers and our support staff, our cafeteria workers, our bus drivers are paid wages where they don't need to have multiple jobs. That's a big piece of it. But it's also making sure that we're empowering our communities and our schools on a local level to make decisions that's best for their kids.
And you mentioned kind of those low teacher wages. You've also been a big supporter of increasing the minimum wage for all workers in Missouri. Why do you think that that is an important step that the state takes?
Yeah, you know, I'm really grateful for the folks who have worked on this proposition to bring the increased minimum wage to the ballot. We know that voters continuously support this. What I'm really excited about this year on top of that is part of the proposition will actually add to a mandatory earned sick leave for individuals. So when folks are working, they get earned sick leave alongside that. And again, as a working parent, I understand when your kid gets sick and having to call into your boss and be like, oh my gosh, am I going to lose my job? That's a real thing. And so it's super important. Not just for you know, the economic development of our state. You know, when folks have more money, they're going to spend more money, and that, you know, the data shows that. But it's also about making sure that folks are living productive lives. You know, we have so many people right now in the state of Missouri who have to work 3 or sometimes even 4 minimum wage jobs to get by. You know, when minimum wage was established, it was for young people in high school to get, you know, their feet wet in the job market. But now so many people are breadwinners of the family are having to work multiple minimum wage jobs. And so, of course, I support increasing that wage and giving everyone that earned sick leave that they deserve.
And what would you say to some opponents who argue that raising the minimum wage might harm small businesses? You
know, we've heard that forever, and we're not seeing that. And so the data just doesn't support that. You know, when employees are making better wages, they're going to spend that money locally in their community. You know, and the unfortunate reality is a lot of these wage workers that we're talking about, they don't have the luxury of putting it into savings, you know, and that's the thing that you hear often, like, oh, they're just not going to spend that money. They're going to put it aside. That's not the world that we live in right now. People are having to choose between paying their utility bills and their mortgages every month, and that's a real thing. And so those increased wages, absolutely, you will see that right back in your local community.
And my final question for you, as people head to the ballot box this November, if they vote for Crystal Quade, what are they voting for?
You know, I think if folks go to the ballot box and vote for Crystal Quade, it's something different. You know, we have had the same thing, the status quo in Jefferson City for a long time. Republicans have led the legislature for 20 years. My opponent has served in the current administration for many years. And as mentioned, we're ranking bottom on everything. I personally believe that Missourians deserve better than what we've been getting, and a Quade administration will bring that.
Well, Representative, that is all I have. Thank you so much for joining me.
Thank you. I appreciate your time.